The $190 million deal died at 8:42 a.m., and the only thing missing from the room was the man they had fired 4 days earlier. On the 17th floor of Hawthorne Medical Systems, Bradley Whitaker stood at the head of a glass conference table with a closing binder open in front of him and a victory smile he had been rehearsing for weeks. The champagne was already waiting on a silver cart near the wall. The press release was scheduled for 9:30. Northbridge Health Capital had their attorneys on Zoom. The bankers were pretending not to check their phones, and half our board was already looking relieved enough to spend money they had not received yet. Then the transaction dashboard refreshed. One green line turned red. Closing blocked. Protocol continuity failure. I was not there to see Bradley's face, but I heard about it later from 3 different people, and every version started the same way. First, he laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because men like Bradley laugh when reality walks into the room without an appointment. It's a clerical issue, he said, tapping the table with one finger. Probably a registry delay. General counsel did not laugh. She leaned toward her laptop, read the line twice, and went pale in that quiet corporate way where nobody panics, because panicking would make the minutes more expensive. Across the screen, Northbridge's lead attorney, Margaret Ellison, removed her glasses and said, "We cannot proceed while Hawthorne lacks an active protocol compliance authority on record." That was the sentence that turned a celebration into a funeral for a deal. At that same moment, 14 miles away, I was sitting in a corner booth at Miller's Diner off Route 9, drinking coffee strong enough to strip paint and watching my daughter scrape butter across a stack of pancakes. My phone was face down beside the napkin dispenser, buzzing every few seconds like an insect trapped under glass. I did not answer. Not out of revenge. Not out of pride. I did not answer because I no longer worked for Hawthorne, and one thing I had learned in 19 years of compliance was that authority is not a feeling. It is either documented, active, and legally assigned, or it does not exist. My name is Owen Mercer. I was 54 years old when Bradley Whitaker decided I was the obstacle between him and his promotion. Officially, my title was Senior Protocol and Compliance Director. Unofficially, I was the guy who read every line the executives skipped before they sold medical diagnostic equipment to hospitals across the country. Every validation packet, every ISO audit trail, every chain of custody form, every FDA response draft, every temperature excursion report from a truck crossing 600 miles of summer highway, it all came across my desk. I did not make the company exciting. I made it defensible. And in American business, that difference only matters after someone arrogant enough to ignore the rules tries to cash a check the paperwork cannot support. So stay with me, because Bradley did not lose his $190 million deal when the dashboard went red. He lost at the moment he fired me for refusing to certify a lie. That was what Bradley never understood about my job. Protocol was not decoration. It was the quiet scaffolding holding the building upright, while people in expensive suits argued about growth. I had joined Hawthorne Medical Systems 19 years earlier, when the company still leased 2 floors above a dental supply warehouse in Dayton, and our biggest customer was a hospital network in western Pennsylvania. Back then, we shipped diagnostic units in foam-lined crates, tracked calibration records in 3-ring binders, and prayed the fax machine did not jam during audit week. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest, and I was good at it. Before Hawthorne, I had spent 12 years in quality systems for a surgical equipment manufacturer outside Cleveland, where one missing lot number could stop an entire product line until every component was traced by hand. That kind of work changes how you see the world. Other people see a signature. I see liability. Other people see a deadline. I see the first place someone will cut a corner when the bonus is close. At Hawthorne, my desk sat near the back of the compliance floor, under a vent that rattled every winter. I kept black coffee on the left, validation binders on the right, and a yellow legal pad in the middle because computers are useful until someone needs to remember what was said before the minutes got cleaned up. The younger managers used to joke that I could smell a bad certification package from across the room. They were not entirely wrong. A mismatched date, a missing calibration sticker, a test report signed by someone who was out sick that day, small things like that told stories. My job was listening before those stories became subpoenas. For 19 years, I protected Hawthorne from the kind of mistakes that never appear in marketing decks. We passed every major ISO surveillance audit. We answered Food and Drug Administration questions without panic. We kept hospital contracts alive because risk officers trusted the name at the bottom of our compliance letters. Mine. Not because I was special, but because I was consistent. Every executive at Hawthorne liked that consistency when it helped close deals. They just hated it when it slowed one down. That was the part Bradley could not tolerate. He wanted compliance to behave like a service department, something he could order around like catering. He did not understand that some rules do not bend because a vice president has a quarterly target. By the time Northbridge entered the picture, my name was embedded in more than files. It was in the transaction reliance schedule, the validation authority registry, the customer assurance letters, and the continuity clause our founder insisted on after a failed audit years earlier. Bradley saw a gray-haired employee with binders. What he missed was simpler and much more expensive. The deal he wanted to own was standing on paperwork I was legally responsible for refusing to fake. Bradley Whitaker arrived at Hawthorne with the energy of a man who had mistaken access for ability. He was 38, polished, loud in the careful way corporate people are loud without raising their voices, and married to Chairman Hensley's youngest daughter. Nobody said that last part in meetings, of course. In meetings, Bradley was a rising strategic leader with a strong growth mindset. In the break room, after the door closed, he was the reason people lowered their voices before telling the truth. His first week, he walked through our compliance floor holding an iced coffee and a tablet, nodding at binders like they were museum artifacts. "We need to reduce friction here," he said, stopping beside my desk. "This entire function feels very 20th century." I looked at his shoes, which had white soles and had clearly never touched a warehouse floor, then looked back at the validation packet I was reviewing. "Regulators still accept dates from the 20th century," I said. "They get particular about whether they are true." He smiled like he had decided I was quaint. That was Bradley's favorite way to insult people. He did not call you stupid. He made you feel archived. Over the next 18 months, he built his little kingdom out of phrases. Deal velocity, commercial acceleration, strategic simplification, executive ownership. He loved words that sounded expensive and could not be measured with a torque wrench or an audit checklist. Every Monday, he held a growth meeting on the 15th floor, where he stood in front of a screen and explained our own company to people who had been keeping it alive before he learned where the loading dock was. Then Northbridge appeared, and Bradley became unbearable. The Diagnostic Systems Division was not our flashiest unit, but it was stable, regulated, and profitable. Northbridge wanted it because hospitals trusted it. Bradley wanted it because a clean $190 million divestiture would turn him from the chairman's son-in-law into the heir apparent. The rumor came from finance first. If the deal closed before quarter end, Bradley would receive a $2.8 million transaction bonus and a serious shot at chief operating officer. That was when the calendar invites started changing. Compliance reviews that normally took 6 weeks were squeezed into 10 business days. Validation summaries arrived with cheerful notes asking for a quick sign-off. Legal started copying me on fewer threads and Bradley's assistant on more. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a packet landed on my desk with 14 open items buried under a cover sheet marked ready for closing. 3 dates did not match the raw logs. 1 calibration record was missing. 2 hospital acceptance forms referenced equipment that had not completed final review. I walked the packet to Bradley's office myself. He did not look up when I entered. "Owen," he said, already irritated. "Tell me this is good news." I placed the folder on his desk. "It is honest news." He finally looked at me, and for the first time, the smile disappeared. Bradley opened the folder like he expected to find a typo, not a wall. I had flagged 14 unresolved items in red, each one tied to a validation requirement Northbridge had specifically listed in the transaction reliance schedule. He flipped through the pages too fast to read them, then leaned back in his chair with that disappointed executive look people use when facts refuse to behave. "Owen, this is exactly what I mean by friction," he said. "These are not friction points," I said. "They are closing conditions." He tapped one page with his pen. "This calibration record is from a hospital trial unit. The unit passed performance review. The unit passed performance review after the temperature log was corrected," I said. "The original transport record is missing 6 hours between Columbus and Pittsburgh. 6 hours on a truck does not kill a $190 million deal." "No," I said. "Certifying that those 6 hours were documented when they were not does." His jaw moved once, like he was chewing on something bitter. Then he stood and walked to the glass wall overlooking the parking lot, where the afternoon sun flashed off rows of employee windshields. "You know what your problem is?" he said. "You think the business exists to serve the paperwork." I closed the folder. "The business exists because the paperwork proves we did what we said we did." That was the wrong answer for a man who needed the quarter to end before anyone looked too closely. The next morning, Bradley called a leadership meeting on the 15th floor. He invited finance, legal, operations, investor relations, and 3 board observers who almost never attended anything before lunch. I knew what was coming when I saw the title slide, Transaction Readiness Update. Corporate people love neutral titles for loaded guns. Bradley spent 20 minutes praising team alignment, cross-functional momentum, and decisive leadership. Then he clicked to a slide labeled Protocol Delay, 1 employee bottleneck. My name was not on it, but it did not need to be. Everyone turned just enough to let me know they understood. Bradley looked at me across the table. "Some people build value," he said. "Some people guard binders." Nobody laughed, but nobody defended me either. That is how these rooms work. Silence puts on a suit and calls itself professionalism. I looked at the slide, then at the clock on the wall. 2:17 p.m., Wednesday. I wrote it down on my yellow legal pad. Not because I planned to sue him. Because memory gets edited in companies like Hawthorne, and ink does not care who gets promoted. Bradley kept going. He said protocol review would be streamlined, legacy sign-off dependencies would be eliminated, and decision rights would move closer to commercial leadership. It sounded clean if you did not know what he was actually saying. He was preparing the room to accept a lie as efficiency. When the meeting ended, General Counsel avoided my eyes. Finance packed up too quickly. Bradley stayed behind and smiled. "We are moving forward, Owen," he said. "I suggest you decide whether you are part of that." I nodded once and picked up my folder. What Bradley did not understand was that the missing calibration record was not the real problem. The 14 red flags were not the real problem either. The real problem was buried in a document he had never opened, signed by a founder he barely respected, and attached to the deal he thought was already his. By Thursday morning, Bradley had stopped pretending this was a discussion. The meeting invite landed at 9:06 with no agenda. Just me, Bradley, and Meredith Shaw from Human Resources in Conference Room C, the small room with no windows and a table that always smelled faintly like dry erase markers. I brought the Northbridge folder with me because habit is stronger than optimism. Bradley was already seated when I walked in, jacket off, sleeves rolled up like he had seen executives do in magazines when they wanted to look decisive. Meredith would not look directly at me. That told me more than the folder in front of her. "Owen," Bradley said, using the soft voice managers use when the decision was made before you entered the room, "we have reached an unfortunate point." I sat down. "With the transaction package?" "With your alignment," he said. There it was. Not my work. Not my accuracy. My alignment. Meredith slid a document across the table. The first page said separation notice. The reason listed was insubordination and obstruction of strategic transaction objectives. I read it twice, slowly, mostly because Bradley hated waiting. "Obstruction," I said. "That is an interesting word for refusing to backdate a certification." Meredith's pen stopped moving. Bradley's smile tightened. "Nobody asked you to backdate anything." I opened my folder and placed 3 pages on the table, one after another. The certification summary he had sent Tuesday. The raw validation log. The hospital acceptance form with a date 3 days before the final review was completed. "Then this should be easy to correct," I said. "We can send Northbridge a revised packet today." Bradley leaned forward. "We are not reopening diligence because you are uncomfortable with formatting. Dates are not formatting. They are when the underlying work is complete." I looked at Meredith. She was staring at the table. I looked back at Bradley. The underlying work is not complete until the record proves it is complete. He exhaled through his nose, then reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out one more document. "Fine. Then sign this as your final certification before departure, and we will let legal handle the cleanup." That was the moment the room changed temperature. The document had my name typed under the authorization block. It stated that all transaction critical protocol records had been reviewed, validated, and found complete as of Wednesday at 5 p.m. A tidy sentence. A useful sentence. A false sentence. I placed my hand flat on the page and turned it back toward him. "I cannot certify something that did not happen." Bradley stared at me like I had refused to hold an elevator. Do you understand what you are doing? Yes, I said. I am following the process Hawthorne approved. He laughed under his breath. No, Owen. You are making yourself unnecessary. Then he nodded to Meredith. She pushed the exit packet closer. My badge access would end by 5. My laptop would be collected before I left the floor. My email would be archived. Standard procedure, finally showing up late to its own funeral. I signed only the receipt acknowledging I had received the paperwork. Nothing else. Bradley watched the pen move and said, "You are going to regret making this personal." I capped the pen and stood. Bradley, the only personal thing in this room is your bonus. For the first time all week, he had no quick answer. I walked back to my desk, packed a coffee mug, 2 framed photographs, and the yellow legal pad with Wednesday, 2:17 p.m. written across the top. I did not take files. I did not copy records. I did not touch a system I no longer had authority to touch. I simply left Hawthorne exactly the way Bradley claimed he wanted me to leave, removed from the process. What he did not know was that removing me was the process. At 5:20 that evening, my badge stopped opening doors. I know because I tried it once at the lobby turnstile, not to get back in, but to confirm the timestamp. The reader blinked red. The guard gave me an uncomfortable nod, and I walked out carrying a cardboard box with a coffee mug, 2 photographs, and a legal pad that suddenly felt heavier than any binder I had ever owned. I drove home in silence, past the same strip malls, gas stations, and office parks I had passed for 19 years, while Hawthorne's glass building shrank in my rearview mirror like a mistake getting smaller. At home, I did what compliance people do when someone makes a bad decision and calls it leadership. I documented the change. In the bottom drawer of my home office desk, inside a blue folder labeled Employment Records, I kept my original agreement from 2017. Most people never read those after signing them. I read mine every year, usually during tax season, because old contracts are like old bridges. They only look boring until weight gets put on them. Appendix D, Section 11.4, had been written after the Patterson audit, back when our founder, Elaine Carver, still ran Hawthorne like a company that understood consequences. A junior executive had tried to swap compliance signatories during a product review without board approval, and an outside auditor nearly froze 2 hospital contracts over it. Elaine hated surprises. She hated preventable ones more. So she made legal add a continuity clause to my agreement and to every transaction reliance schedule after that. If the designated protocol compliance authority was removed, terminated, or materially restricted before a board-approved successor was assigned and confirmed by external counsel, all active certification packages under that authority became non-transferable until formally revalidated. Dry language. Expensive language. The kind Bradley would have skipped because it did not fit on a slide. I read it twice, then opened my personal laptop and drafted 1 email. I did not use confidential files. I did not attach company records. I did not accuse anyone of anything. I simply wrote to Patricia Voss, Hawthorne's general counsel, from my personal account, because my company email was already locked. Subject: Protocol Continuity Notice. Patricia, confirming that my employment and authorization as designated Protocol Compliance Authority ended today at approximately 5 p.m. Please update all active transaction reliance records, including Northbridge materials, to reflect that I am no longer authorized to certify, validate, or transfer protocol packages on behalf of Hawthorne. Appendix D, Section 11.4 of my employment agreement may be relevant. Regards, Owen Mercer. For sentences. No threats. No emotion. Just a clean notice placed where legal could not pretend it had never arrived. Patricia opened it at 6:18. I know because she replied at 6:21 with 1 sentence. Thank you, Owen. I will review this immediately. Bradley replied to her forwarded copy 11 minutes later. He did not include me, but he did not have to. A friend in legal told me later what he wrote. Handle Owen's drama after closing. That was his real mistake. Not firing me. Not insulting me. Not even trying to push false dates through a deal package. His mistake was believing the law could be scheduled around his bonus. Friday morning began with the kind of quiet that makes legal departments nervous. Patricia Voss called me at 7:32 before I had finished my first cup of coffee. Patricia was not dramatic. She had been Hawthorne's general counsel for 11 years, which meant she could sound calm while reading a document that might set the building on fire. "Owen," she said, "I need to confirm something. As of this morning, you are no longer employed, no longer authorized, and no successor has been approved by the board. Correct?" I looked out my kitchen window at a delivery truck idling across the street. "That is correct." She exhaled once, very slowly. "And you did not sign the final Northbridge certification summary?" "No, did Bradley ask you to?" I paused. In compliance, silence can be as useful as a signature if you let people fill it correctly. "Patricia, there is a document in conference room C from Thursday morning with my name typed under an authorization block. I declined to sign it because it was not accurate." She went quiet. Then she said, "Thank you. Not, I am sorry. Not, this is a problem. Just thank you," which in lawyer language means the hallway just got longer. By 10:15, I heard from Angela Kim, a senior analyst in quality systems who had worked with me for 9 years and still knew how to talk without putting anything sensitive in writing. She called from her car during what she called a coffee run, even though I could hear the turn signal clicking like a metronome. "They are scrambling," she said. "Bradley told everyone legal has a continuity issue, but he is saying it is administrative." That sounds like Bradley. "It is worse than that." I waited. Angela lowered her voice, though she was alone. "Northbridge sent the final diligence checklist last night. One item asks Hawthorne to confirm active employment status of the named Protocol Compliance Authority. Bradley's assistant marked it confirmed." I closed my eyes for half a second. Not from surprise. From disappointment. There is a difference. Did legal approve that response? Not according to Patricia's team. There it was. The story had changed shape. Until that moment, Bradley had been careless, arrogant, and reckless with procedure. Now he had allowed a buyer to receive a statement that did not match reality. In a transaction this size, that was not a paperwork problem. That was a representation problem. I told Angela not to send me anything and not to get involved. She sounded relieved and scared at the same time. After we hung up, I opened a blank document and wrote a timeline from memory. Tuesday packet received, Wednesday leadership slide, Thursday termination, Thursday final certification request, Thursday continuity notice, Friday active employment confirmation. Times, names, rooms, exact phrases where I remembered them. Then I saved it locally and did nothing for almost an hour. Doing nothing is underrated. People like Bradley count on everyone else reacting emotionally so they can call it instability. I had no intention of giving him that. At 12:46, Patricia called again. This time, her voice had lost the softness. "Owen, outside counsel may contact you to verify the sequence of events. I will answer truthfully. That is all I can ask." By 4:16, Margaret Ellison from Northbridge had joined a call with Hawthorne Legal, outside counsel, and 2 people from the board audit committee. I was not on that call. I did not need to be. The documents were finally talking, and unlike executives, documents do not care who married into power. Monday morning did not begin with shouting. It began with glass walls, polished shoes, and a transaction dashboard everyone trusted until the one line that mattered turned red. By 8:56, Hawthorne's emergency board meeting had replaced the closing ceremony. The champagne cart was gone. The bankers were muted. Northbridge's legal team remained on the screen, no longer smiling, while Chairman Hensley sat at the head of the table with both hands folded over a copy of Appendix D. Bradley stood near the monitor, still trying to look useful. His tie was slightly crooked now, which told me the morning had done what years of feedback never could. It had reached him. I joined by video from my home office after Patricia asked whether I would verify a few facts for the board. I wore a blue dress shirt, no tie, and the expression of a man who had already read the ending in the footnotes. Bradley saw my face appear on the screen and pointed before anyone even asked him a question. "This is retaliation," he said. "Owen is weaponizing paperwork because he disagreed with a business decision." Nobody responded. That was the first bad sign for him. Patricia clicked once, and the main screen changed to my separation notice. Termination date, Thursday. Effective time, 5 p.m. Authorization status, inactive. Then she opened the transaction reliance schedule. Designated Protocol Compliance Authority, Owen Mercer. Then Appendix D, Section 11.4. Then the Northbridge diligence checklist with one answer highlighted. Active employment confirmed. The room did not explode. Corporate rooms almost never do. They tighten. Shoulders rise a quarter inch. Pins stop moving. Someone from finance looks down because math suddenly feels safer than ethics. Margaret Ellison spoke from the Northbridge screen, her voice flat enough to cut through every excuse Bradley had prepared. Our closing conditions require an active and authorized protocol compliance authority. Hawthorne represented that Mr. Mercer remained active after his termination. That representation is inaccurate. Bradley shook his head. It was an administrative timing issue. Owen's work was substantially complete. I leaned closer to my camera. Substantially complete is not a protocol status. His eyes snapped toward the screen. You are splitting hairs. No, Patricia said before I could answer. He is describing the condition precedent to closing. That was when Bradley made his final mistake. He tried to sound like the only adult in the room. With respect, this is exactly the kind of legacy thinking that has been slowing Hawthorne down for years. We cannot let one former employee hold a strategic transaction hostage over technical language. Chairman Hensley looked at him then. Really looked at him. Not like a son-in-law, not like a future executive, but like a man reading a number he did not like. Did you ask him to sign the final certification after deciding to terminate him? Bradley opened his mouth, then closed it. Patricia clicked again. The unsigned certification summary appeared, my name typed under the authorization block. Next came the raw validation log. Then the missing calibration record. Then Bradley's forwarded message to legal, handle Owen's drama after closing. The room went so still I could hear the hum of my own laptop. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. You did not need me to save the deal, Bradley. You needed me to lie for it. Margaret Ellison removed her glasses. Northbridge is suspending closing pending independent review. Bradley turned toward the chairman, but the chairman was no longer looking at him. He was looking at the red line on the dashboard, the one Bradley had called clerical, the one that had just become the most honest thing in the room. Northbridge did not walk away that morning. They did something worse for Bradley. They paused, documented, and asked for everything. Every protocol packet, every email about timing, every version of the certification summary, every name attached to every approval chain. In corporate America, there are worse sounds than a door slamming. One of them is outside counsel saying, "Please preserve all records." By Tuesday afternoon, Hawthorne had opened an independent review led by the audit committee. Bradley's access to the transaction room was suspended pending findings, which is corporate language for someone finally took his keys away without making a scene. The company announced a delay for documentation alignment, but inside the building, everybody knew. Angela told me the 15th floor got quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet in the way a casino gets quiet when the lights come on. People started remembering things. The leadership slide. The missing calibration record. The meeting in conference room C. The certification summary with my name typed neatly under a statement I had refused to make. 3 weeks later, the review ended exactly where careful people knew it would. Bradley had pushed an inaccurate representation into a buyer diligence response after being warned that my authority had ended. He had pressured compliance to sign off on records that were not ready. He had treated a continuity clause like an inconvenience until it became the only sentence anyone wanted to read. Hawthorne terminated him for cause on a Friday at 4:30 p.m. because companies love symmetry when they are embarrassed. Chairman Hensley called me the next Monday. No small talk. No apology tour. Just his old voice, tired around the edges, saying, "Owen, we need to repair the process." I told him the process was not broken. It had worked. The people trying to go around it had broken themselves against it. Northbridge came back 60 days later, but not at the same price. The $190 million closing window was gone. After independent revalidation, legal remediation, and a buyer confidence adjustment that made finance physically uncomfortable, the revised offer landed at $143 million. $47 million did not vanish because I held a grudge. It vanished because Bradley thought truth was a speed bump. Hawthorne hired me back, but not as an employee. I signed an independent consulting agreement with board-level reporting rights, a higher hourly rate than Bradley would have approved, and one clause of my own: no executive override of protocol certification without written notice to the audit committee and external counsel. I also required a named successor, properly trained, properly protected, and impossible to remove quietly during an active transaction. Her name was Angela Kim. She earned it. The day I walked back into Hawthorne, people expected some speech. I gave none. I went to the compliance floor, placed my old coffee mug on the desk, and opened the first revalidation packet. The vent still rattled. The binders still looked boring. The work still mattered. That is the part men like Bradley never understand. Protocol does not exist to slow honest people down. It exists because dishonest shortcuts are always faster right up until the bill arrives. I did not destroy Bradley Whitaker. I just refused to lend him my signature while he destroyed himself.